I want to talk about Hillary Clinton and where she was at this time, because we know Bernie Sanders was an activist. He was fighting to desegregate the University of Chicago, but what was Hillary Clinton doing? She campaigned for Barry Goldwater, a Republican who was not in favor of desegregation.
I was a Goldwater girl. I mean, really, we used to wear, little banners which said Goldwater girl.
Around the time of the Brown case, a move toward voluntary desegregation was apparent in many areas of the South and in many areas of life. A lot of scholars have noted that if you favor desegregation, this case was not necessary.
The Heart of Atlanta Motel opened in 1956. It was owned by a well-known supporter of segregation who operated his businesses by refusing accommodations to blacks.
By 1963, Kennedy had done little to end segregation.
An American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public.
He didn't want to alienate white Southern politicians who had been firmly opposed to granting civil rights to blacks, politicians he needed for his other programs.
Kennedy's civil rights bill had been languishing, locked up in the Senate.
A law which will eliminate one of the most embittering forms of racial discrimination, the denial of free access to places of public accommodation, restaurants, stores, hotels, lunch counters, and other establishments of service or amusement.
President Kennedy was unable to spring it loose.
The Democrats have been in Washington, D.C. only because of the Negro vote. They've been down there 4 years. And all other legislation they wanted to bring up, they brought it up and gotten it out of the way, and now they bring up you. You put them first, and they put you last.
In my home state, we have very few public places that remain segregated. By pointing out to business people that it is morally wrong to practice discrimination, and it's also economically bad. This type of approach, while I know it's time-consuming, it is having its effect, will have its effect, and I think it will achieve what we want.
I will never vote for a public accommodations clause in any civil rights bill because I think it's unconstitutional. I think it tampers with the rights of assembly, the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the freedom of property.
Lyndon Johnson, a Southern senator who'd long been ambivalent about civil rights legislation, made big efforts to complete an agenda that Kennedy had not been able to complete.
No memorial oration or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest possible passage of the Civil Rights Bill for which he fought so long.
His previous attitudes in the Senate from the time he first came there was one of accommodating the racial inclinations of his strongest supporters in Texas. And his public statements were very negative about civil rights.
On civil rights, he gives these speeches that are essentially white supremacist speeches.
When running for Congress in 1948, Johnson had told his constituents the civil rights program was a farce and a sham, an effort to set up a police state in the guise of liberty. I am opposed to that program.
It was almost like the devil on one side and the angel on the other. The angel was saying, you have the chance to do more for civil rights than any president in history. The devil was saying, don't throw it away, Lyndon. Be cautious. Don't do something that's not only going to get you in trouble, but may cause you to be defeated when you have to run for election in 1964.
Senator Goldwater is going to shock a whole lot of people by putting up a better fight than most people expect him to. White people in America, by and large, are becoming increasingly militantly against the fast pace that they think that our people are pressing them toward.
Johnson was very conscious of the fact that one thing he could do in history was to be the president that got Southerners nervous about civil rights to accept civil rights.
It's the day of decision on Capitol Hill as the U.S. Senate clears the way for the Civil Rights Bill by voting to limit debate on the measure.
One way he felt he could do that, especially in private, was to use the N-word, which was sort of a way of showing, I haven't changed that much, don't think I'm a turncoat.
I'm about to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Johnson rapped on the phone booth, Sam, we're going to get the nigger bill up at 2 o'clock.
You today are in the hands of a government of segregationists, racists, white supremacists, who belong to the Democratic Party but disguise themselves as Dixiecrats. Dixiecrat is nothing but a Democrat. Whoever runs the Democrats is also the father of the Dixiecrats. and the father of all of them is sitting in the White House. You got a president who's nothing but a Southern segregationist.
With Martin Luther King at his side, he signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Following the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the motel owners sued the federal government to bar enforcement of its provisions. The suit claimed that in passing the act, Congress had exceeded its constitutionally granted power to regulate commerce. On December 14, 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision forcing businesses to abide by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The ruling upheld a law prohibiting discrimination in private hotels. The Heart of Atlanta Motel was ordered to stop refusing service to African Americans.
We represent the majority of the people in Alabama who hate niggerism, Catholicism, Judaism, and all the isms of the whole world. So said Robert Creel of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. He also said, I like Barry Goldwater. He needs our help. Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Are you concerned, perhaps, about the Democrats taking advantage of this?
After Lyndon Johnson, the biggest faker in the United States, having opposed the Civil Rights Act for all the years of his life, this is the phoniest individual that ever came around.
Barry Goldwater was opposed to that, and he wasn't considered an evil person.
This is the basic disagreement between the Negro community and Senator Goldwater. They don't think he's prejudiced. They don't think he's a racist. I don't think he's a racist. But they can't go along with a man who says we ought to let what's going on in Mississippi be settled by Mississippi.
Back then, Chris Matthews was a supporter of Barry Goldwater on his position.
We've had a long history of government involvement with Medicare, Social Security, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and I think you're saying we would have been better off without all that.
You said, contrary to the claims of the supporters of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the act did not improve race relations or enhance freedom. Instead, the forced integration dictated by the Civil Rights Act of 1964 increased racial tensions while diminishing individual liberty.
You mean those dining counters that black people tried to integrate? You think those should not have been integrated because that's private property?
No, there would be zero signs up today saying something like that, and if they did, they would be an idiot and they would be out of business.
We could have done it in a better way.
Most of the civil strife and the segregation came from government.
It's the government that causes so much of the racial tensions.
You need to get rid of the laws and all the things that the government did to promote the segregation.
You need to repeal the very, very bad laws that governments have propagated over the many centuries, because it is the government so often that institutionalized segregation and slavery and all the other things.
Slavery, I mean, that was a government function. We segregated the military, in World War II. The Jim Crow laws, that's government.
The Jim Crow laws obviously had to get rid of, and we're all better off for that. And the war on drugs, just think of how biased that is against the minorities.
Where were the biggest riots over busing? In Boston. The people who did the most preaching about those terrible people in the South.
I've always had a notion that I would rather have a converted Southerner on my side than a wobbly Northern liberal.
If the same two items remained in the bill that caused me to think it unconstitutional at that time remained in any bill today, I would have to vote against it.
Certain portions of that bill were unconstitutional, but getting rid of the laws in the states that were blatantly unconstitutional, and were illegal, they should have been repealed. There's nothing wrong with repealing these things, but to take over private property is a different thing. The portions of the law in 1964 that were bad because they violated property rights, I object to that because it violates the property rights of people who want to have privacy in their bedroom.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
If Goldwater ever becomes president, one thing his presence in the White House will do, it will make black people in America have to face up to facts, probably for the first time in many, many years. And this in itself is good, in that Goldwater is a man who's not capable of hiding his racist tendencies, and at the same time, he's not capable of even pretending to Negroes that he's their friend. So this will have a tendency to make the Negro, probably for the first time, do something to stand on his own feet and solve his own problem, instead of putting himself in a position to be misled, misused, exploited by the whites who pose as liberals only for the purpose of getting the support of the Negro. So in one sense, Goldwater's coming in will awaken the Negro, and it will probably awaken the entire world, more so than the world has been awakened since Hitler.